The perception gap. The perception gap. Are you a perception gap? Am I a perception gap? What are perception gaps? Who is perception gaps? Sorry, internet historian fan, so today I'm going to talk about the perception gap, what it is, why it happens, and pull some of the pros and cons of the reality of the situation of this gap out we see in media and politics. Once I think I've laid down my case, I'm going to give you my personal solutions on how to snap somebody out of this and what I like to call weaponized whataboutism. We're going to get into whataboutism and when it can be used constructively. For the following video making experience, I am spending my free time learning the basics of video editing, and that's coming soon, but I'm not very good at it, as well as I do want to start streaming, but I'm figuring it all out. I don't even have a webcam. So everyone who's sticking with me and following the progress of my videos, you should see a little bit more personality, a little bit more conciseness in the script, and a little bit more video quality. Not to where I want it to be, but it's coming. So thank you for everybody. Thank you for giving me your time. I hope you enjoy the very short intro. Stand back and stand by. We are diving in. So first, let's define our terms. It's going to be the perception gap. Well, my personal definition, before I get into anything, is a monolith built off defining a large group of people based on their most extreme outliers' actions. I think that's pretty solid. And through messaging, altering a large percentage of people's views on the group, yeah, that's pretty away from reality, I should say. Altering the views on another group using messaging away from the reality of the situation. Simply said, making everyone out in a group to be the worst version of their own side. We saw this with Muslims after 9/11, how the vast majority of Muslims are extremely peaceful, but Muslims in the United States had hate crimes go up against them because of perceived discrimination and whatnot. So let's get into the perception gap. And this is the official Perception Gap website here. I didn't take the quiz, not gonna lie. So we're gonna take a look at some of the key points that I pulled out from here. If you wanna come to this website, perceptiongap.us, take the quiz, really dive into all these things. One, to make sure I'm telling the truth, and two, just out of genuine curiosity. There's a lot I'm not gonna cover. I'm just gonna go over the big things. So what we see here is about twice as many people are thought to be extremists in the political parties than actually are. And of those that actually are, I can get into that as well a little bit, those extreme views aren't nearly as bad as what people think. So go on down here, we're going to take a look at Democrats think half the GOP is anti-immigration, when in reality it's about 15% roughly. And this is legal immigration. The GOP is very anti-illegal immigration. And actually, a lot of older Democrats like myself are as well. Bill Clinton was a big fan of border security, and anyone who joined the party around then probably holds a lot of those views still. So border security is a pretty important issue, and immigration generally is accepted by both parties. It's just illegal immigration that isn't. The GOP has the largest gap in Democrats on police. So the largest gap we see here is that the Republicans think that Democrats hate the police generally, when really it's a small subsection that I showed in a different video is like 6% of the general population, and only like 20% of the Democratic Party are these extreme progressives that want to do things like defund the police. And even if you look at defund the police, that still is a segmented argument. Some people want to completely abolish, and others want to take some funding away and do like 1960s social programs where they send a social worker out and take away mandatory minimums to a degree and lower sentencing and blah, blah, blah. And we've seen it in the past, maybe not to the exact same way, but we see how it makes crime go up, and it's kind of doing the same thing now. If anyone wants to question me on that, I'll link you to a YouTuber named Actual Justice Warrior that goes through this as the main focal point of his channel. And he brings the receipts every single time. So the GOP are slightly worse on the data this year. And this is the year I picked because this is the official website. I like this website a lot. But if you look 2 years ago or 3 years ago when Trump was in office, these numbers were reversed. So as I showed in a different video as well, hopefully you've been watching my other stuff, when Trump won the presidency, the majority of Democrats thought that illegal votes were hacked into the voting machines. Now, the majority of Republicans think that, and election integrity for Democrats is back up over 50%. So really, election integrity has to do with, did your side win? For a large group of people. There are some people with principles out there. I personally disagree with traditional conservatives as a wing. Oh yeah, this is actually it right here. So traditional conservatives as a wing here, I don't think that fits. I like to look at devoted conservatives here versus progressive activists. Those are about the same. Traditional conservatives could include hardcore neocons that really don't like Trump and really don't think too extreme. They would vote for Joe Biden over Trump, meaning that their view of the perception gap isn't as bad as this would suggest. I think traditional conservatives could be moved over into the exhausted majority, to be completely honest. It's the second largest group on here. Tradcons, I do see how they would also fit it in as a wing. I think it reasonably could break that up into two different groups and separate out some. I don't see like hardcore right-wing neocons that are never Trumpers but super conservative as moderates. They're traditional conservatives. And there's a lot of them, like Commentary Magazine. These guys are hardcore right-wingers, but they don't view the left in these obscene ways. And there's a lot of people that follow them that don't either. So I don't like traditional conservatives being mixed in as a wing here. Politically disengaged are the most informed. All right, that's the next one here. So the politically disengaged, when polled, actually show they know more about the actual stances of both sides than people that are on the both sides. Devoted conservatives and progressive activists have the largest perception gap versus reality. The more progressive or the more, I don't know, right-wing isn't the right word because right-wing could mean a lot of things. The more devoted conservative, I guess I'll use their terminology, the more devoted you are to conservatism or progressive, the further away from reality your views on the other side actually are. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more as well, but this graph shows people toward the center, moderates, passive liberal. I think I'm a passive liberal. And maybe in some ways a moderate as well. I don't know. I don't exactly know what I am, but I'd say I'm a passive liberal, and I'd say I have a very good view of what both sides actually want. And when I say both sides, I mean the 10 to 50 different little subgroups underneath the banners of Republican and Democrat. Because if you think all Republicans and all Democrats are the same, you're probably not informed enough to be making general statements about both parties. Again, you want to know more about the right wing? Matt Continetti from Commentary Magazine and AIE wrote a book about the last 100 years of conservatism and the 9 factions in the Conservative Party fighting for power. So if you think all conservatives are just one blob that hates trans people or whatever, chances are you're the one that's misinformed, not them. So education. It seems that I'm not going to worry about the media so much. Although I do like that they do find people that watch some of these toward the bottom here. Actually, their perception gap is closed. I actually watch, well, not Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, but most of these sites on here I frequent. Fox News, I really don't think Fox News is as bad as people on the left say. You take their 4 hours of opinion commentary out of the equation and just go to their news reporting, and it's actually really good. There's a Sirius News radio channel I listen to all the time when I drive. That's Fox News. It is probably the best news channel on Sirius, and it's Fox. It's not, you wouldn't know if they didn't say it. It's just really good. So I could see that Fox is way lower rated than Breitbart News and things like that. CNN is actually better than MSNBC, which, wow. I mean, I read CNN a ton. I love CNN online. 95% of what they put out in article form online is great. MSNBC too, like they're not so bad when you get past the talking heads. More education closes the gap here. So that we're down to education and the perception gap. So it closes the gap for Republicans, but not Democrats. And I have a theory for that I'm going to get into here in a second. So more education helps close the gap. insinuating that it's just bad reputation and indoctrination. You're told, oh, these liberals by your parents, and the more education, the more out you get into the world, the more as a right winger you realize, well, the left wingers aren't as bad as maybe I was told when I was younger or before I actually saw how the world is and works. Whereas it goes the exact opposite way for Democrats. Democrats are actually more open and accepting because tolerance is preached from the left. So before they were indoctrinated into these concepts through the education system, they're actually the most tolerant group. And it turns out when people go to college, it looks as though from here, and this is, I didn't go to a university personally. I can just listen to what people say, and sometimes it's hyperbole and bullshit and people pushing their narratives. But from what it seems, there is a very hard left-leaning bias on campuses. So I could see conservatives going to a postgraduate degree and seeing, wow, this is like a commie breeding ground, and actually thinking that's what the Democratic Party is teaching. Well, again, it's pretty consistent here. The more education for a Democrat, the more they think incorrectly about what Republicans actually believe. And that, to me, shows a flaw in the education system. Now, both sides judge each other in almost the exact same way. Brainwashing, hateful, racist. Now, I mean, this to me is the most clear graph that it's just people smearing each other. They literally think the exact same thing about each other. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't fix this if one side doesn't step up and say, you know, this is actually bad and destructive and harmful, and it's actually hurting our political chances with independence because they see us all as liars. But we keep getting unilateral disarmament arguments, which is if the other side's doing the shady thing, if I don't do it, they have an advantage over us. So Democrats are harvesting vote ballots in California. Now we have to do that in North Carolina, or Republicans are restricting voting groups that support Democrats. So now we need to restrict voting groups that support Republicans. Democrats 10 years ago were against gerrymandering, and now they're even worse offenders of it. So you see this escalation happen as one side does something bad, the other side eventually picks it up, and it's pretty commonplace unless the action's so egregious that somebody gets in trouble or goes to jail, and then you see it stop. If you want to come here and read why the perception gap matters, they give some similar and some different reasons as me, but that's them. I'm giving you the website. Go check me if you don't believe me, or if you just want to know more. So I'm going to move on to the second one, and I don't have any script for this. I was just going to poke through it here. This is something I actually saw on the Destiny stream for the first time, DGG, and for somebody like Destiny who has such a huge perceptual gap between reality and his views on what conservatives think, I did a video on it in the past, but he says it every day almost. If anyone asks him about it, he will tell you he thinks all conservatives don't care about policy and just, oh, trans bad. He's literally using that voice. That's what he thinks, man. And so it's kind of ironic that he was looking at this and making fun of people for not knowing reality when his views on the Republican Party and their policy stances are so far from reality. But let's just dive into it, take a couple look at things. And when I'm looking through this is a nonpartisan graph here, just asking people what they think, but you'll be able to see some things in here that you can link to some partisan policy stances. So having a household over 1 million income and not as much are transgender. So this is something you could probably attribute to right wingers fear mongering about transgenderism and blah blah blah. Maybe they saw that graph where like 20% of Gen Z identifies as some form of non-binary, and they think that means the entire population, but really it's close to 1%. And people that think it's as high as 21% probably have never Googled anything about this and are all just worked up over emotion. Are Muslim. This one, I don't think it has anything to do with political reasons. I think it's just because people constantly say Muslims are the fastest growing religion in the world, and it's the second largest religion in the world. So I personally, if someone asked me what percentage of the U.S. were Muslim, I would say like 10%, just guessing, and it's actually significantly lower. Are Jewish. This one, you see a lot of left and right wingers on the fringes have their different somewhat anti-Semitic stances. For the left wing, I think you would hear people say something along the lines of the double standard that they have for Palestine versus Israel, and some of the comments they make about Jews and money are emblematic of tropes said about the Jews in the past, and the double standard shows that they don't hold Jews in the same regard, and blah, blah, blah. And then from the right wing, obviously, Jewish space lasers and globalists, Jews controlling the media and all that. I think the politician from New York that said Jews control the weather was a Democrat, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not a partisan thing. There are some weird conspiracy theories out there about the Jews. I recently heard that somebody said that all conspiracies lead back to the Jews, and I think that dude needs to go outside a little more because that's not the case. But yeah, you can scroll through some of these. There's a lot of them, and you'll be able to see all sorts of certain things. Own a gun is in 54% own a gun when it's really 32. I think that number is wrong. I think it's 32% of households own a gun. And I think it's closer to 40 something of people that say they own a gun. So I would have to look that up. I know this has nothing to do with the video. I'm just showing you examples of how people's perception can be altered based on messaging, political messaging, to be very far from the truth. Saying are white, I actually thought it was 64%. If you look at some of the crime data, which if you look at my 52 despite 13 debunk video, there's different sources that say, some say white people are 70% of the nation, 77% of the nation. It really, it depends on how you define these terms somewhat. White, if you're taking into account ethnicity, I'm not an expert on it. I'm not going to get into it. I read the methods of the source I'm using and trust them. I don't fully understand. I need someone smarter than me in this particular field of calculating race per population and why. I need someone to explain it to me a little better, because I know that I've read it and it just doesn't make full sense to me. Are vaccinated. That one's actually really close. Have a pet. Yeah, that's actually really, really close. But yeah, you can see a lot of these have a high school degree. 89% have a high school degree, but people only think 65% do. That's a weird one. I don't know what political messaging would be blamed for that. Maybe the anti-public school movement you see out of the right, the voucher school programs and stuff. I don't know. I don't know what would lead to these things. I don't know what political messaging would lead to these things, but it's really interesting to think about. I could see some of these $1 million households and the millionaires. I could see Bernie Sanders maybe contributing to that by attacking those groups, and you think it's more people than it is. Own a home, I could see that one. People are saying home ownership crisis, left and right. I hear that from Tucker Carlson, but I also hear from Elizabeth Warren, the two-household parent trap or whatever, and surprisingly about 2/3 of people own a home in the United States. That's pretty good numbers, actually. But yeah, this is just a good example I wanted to just ramble about for 5 minutes. These are huge gaps in perception versus reality, and anyone is susceptible. Again, I just gave you several examples of me being wrong on these things. Just looking at this, I would guess differently than what the true proportions are in a lot of these things. So it's pretty easy to do. All right, so let's move on to some of the pros and cons. And I will say, this perception gap thing where hyperpartisanship and a divided nation where you view the the adversary as an enemy. You view them as the bad guy, the opposition. You view them as evil. So one of the negatives, and I'm going to dig a little deeper, is that... Actually, you know what? Let me just read my script. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So how does this happen? I wouldn't hold most who fall under this illusion responsible unless you think that the entire world should be highly educated on all of the subjects from both of these perception gap websites. Now, if you think that everyone is their obligation in society to know these things, then you could be a little angry about how this looks, but I don't blame everybody. Not everyone's a political junkie, and they should be able to rely on good, accurate punditry from a trusted news source to give them a good summary of the facts without bias, cherry-picking, narrative building, etc., but we don't have that. We see our media space picking sides much more clearly in the present day than any point in at least my life, and you can no longer watch one source, and you have to... What's recommended is a balanced media diet where you hear out several perspectives, mostly from the mainstream, but I get into some progressives and some far right-winger people, some devoted conservatives, and listen to their views as well, because everybody might have one small thing to contribute to the conversation the last person didn't. So it's good to at least hear people out. Oh, I need a drink. Balanced media diet. Yeah, so when you get a balanced media diet, you get, let's say you go to Fox News and they give you 30% of the story where they cherry pick the facts that force their narrative forward and leave out the ones that don't. Then you go to the New York Times and you get their 30% of the story and their cherry pick narratives that force their side of the story. So you keep doing that, and eventually you can put together the whole story based on these selected cherry pick narratives from every side. If you only listen to one side, though, and you only hear their narratives, you're going to think that side's telling you the truth and everyone else is lying. But in reality, what they're all doing is a form of altering your perception based on selectively editing factual statements and factual factoids, editing factoids to form a narrative. Again, like it's the cherry picking. Cherry picking isn't a bad thing on its own. If you have to go through a giant complicated subject like the perception gap and you need to cherry pick out some factoids in order to make your video less than an hour, 2 hours long, then that's okay. But if you're cherry picking results and you changing the overall narrative of the situation, that's when it's a logical fallacy. That's when it's bullshit. That's when it's a smear. That's when you're disingenuous, bad faith, and probably shouldn't be trusted. Again, if you're doing it and then made aware and then continue to do it, that's the case. If you're saying something just incorrect and someone corrects you and you say, whoops, my bad, and fix it, more power to you. I appreciate you for owning up to your mistake. I try to do that as much as I can as well. So skills most people can build over time if they want. So in a balanced media diet, you need to be able to piece together these factoids and pull them out of the narratives and sift through the bullshit and smears that are being thrown at you in order to put together this story. And that's a skill probably most people can build up over time, but you really shouldn't have to. And so that's why that's a con to me of this system. Now, there is no objective source, unfortunately. Some say the media's kind of always been this way, just better or worse at times. Yet there is a very big pro that comes out of this as well, and that's opposition journalism. If you got a hyper left-wing partisan group, those are the exact people you want to be investigating right-wingers, and vice versa. I want the New York Times to tear Donald Trump apart, and if they find something like that tax story that was pretty damning in 2017, I want that reported. And people that don't like Trump are the best ones to probably do that. I would rather have National Review and Breitbart investigating Biden and not MSNBC, but I'd rather have the Atlantic and the New York Times investigating Trump and not Fox News. Why? Because when someone is digging up dirt for a story, I want them to give their best effort to damn the person in power while still remaining honest and keeping their integrity intact. When we see what happens when media outlets have to cover their own side, and often it's softball questions, or in the case of Hillary Clinton, they were giving her debate questions before the debate so she could prepare. With Joe Biden, they're giving him press conference questions that he has written on a card so he's ready to go right out the gates. They select what stories, like with the Hunter Biden laptop, they select to leave that story out of the media until after the election, even though it was factually true, just because it would make Biden look bad. I think the number Trump keeps citing, and I did actually see one anecdotal poll for this, 17% of Biden voters wouldn't have voted for Biden if they knew about the Hunter Biden pump and dump scheme in China, which I think is still alleged pump and dump scheme in China. So, I mean, take that as you will. One anecdotal poll for me doesn't make something set in stone, so I don't know if I believe that, but even if, 100,000 voters changed their vote as a result, it could have been a different election depending on where they were located. So the media withholding this story that I think only 10% of the story is actually about Biden doing bad things, and the rest of it's just his son being a degenerate, crackhead, hiring prostitutes. I didn't look into it, I don't care that much, but I think there's some allegations in there that he was doing some things with his niece. Hunter Biden's not a politician. I don't care that much. The only thing I care about is the 10% that was supposedly going to the big guy and the follow-up investigation on that. You might not like Republicans. I trust them as much as I trust Democrats. So if I trust the Democrats to look into Donald Trump about these Mar-a-Lago documents, then I trust the Republicans to look into Joe Biden about these pay-for-play schemes when his son was working in China or Ukraine. So, just let the investigation happen. We don't have to actually have a take on everything. I don't like any of them. Biden's the president. I want him to have success because that means the nation is successful as well. So again, not picking a side, but again, these are the people we want for opposition journalism. I gave you some good examples as to why it's a bad thing if we don't have them. I want the New York Post to be reporting on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's laptop. So, sure, hyper really happens, but what I was explaining a second ago about opposition media, this only holds up if they're telling the truth. Once they start using bad fake tactics, lying, assuming intent, and all sorts of logical fallacies, then what I just said above goes out the window. Integrity has to be intact. That's one piece of criteria. So the perception gap is also pushed by political messaging and politicians. Examples would be calling all Democrats socialists or all Republicans fascist, when there are some Democratic socialists, but even they say that their ideas aren't like the old communists of old, and fascism isn't even close to American conservatism. And people that say that ignore a giant component of fascism, which is its Marxist roots. I'm going to make a video on that next, especially going after Destiny, for a video we did just a couple days ago where he called Trump a fascist, and when asked why, he didn't name any of his policies, any of his political views. He named a couple of actions and said, because of these couple of actions, he's a fascist. It's so... You don't do that for any other political movement, political view. Well, because he was pro reforming agriculture and giving workers rights in the jobs that they work at, he was a socialist. That's not what socialists do. There's a lot of people that would do the things that a fascist do, because not all fascist policies were bad or evil. Just, a good handful of the really popular ones were like killing all the Jews. But most of the policies from the fascist government were things we still see in different forms today. So just defining fascism as cherry-picking a bunch of actions is a smear. That's it. So there are some Democratic socialists, but they are far from the commies that the GOP suggests. And there are some people on the right wing with race and nationalist purity views akin to the Nazis. But they're not fascists in so much that they just hold the right-wing views that the fascists did without all the socialism and economic socialism intact with it as well. Now, a massive con of doing this in politics is because you need both sides. Each side needs each other to get the best path forward. Conservatism versus progressivism, at its core, shedding the parties and just looking at the roots of these two words. Do we leave shit how it is, or do we change it to better fit new times or people? That's really the arguments that we're having here boil down to their most simple forms. Conservatism. Do we leave shit how it is because it got that way for a reason? Progressivism. Do we change shit because factors changed and the way it was isn't working anymore? That's it. That's all these two arguments are. And every single progressive holds some conservative stances. Every single conservative holds some progressive stances. Having a healthy debate from all factions that fall under the two tenets of both sides is how you move forward, crafting the best legislation that fits the most people. And nobody's ever going to be 100% happy. But when you have this bipartisanship, compromise, the things that come out of your side are the best points that you have that pass the bullshit test of the other side, and vice versa, making the final result of policy the best thing it could be. It's imperative that both sides work together. Why this perception gap and demonizing framing throws a wrench in all of this is because if you say the other side are bad, if they're evil, if you can no longer work with them because they're bad and evil, then you can no longer work with them. So nothing's going to get done. You can justify your own side denying election results, like in 2020 with what Trump did. Why? Well, 2016, they said Trump was the illegitimate president and that Russia worked to steal the election. The majority of Democrats believed in polling that Russia hacked voting booths and pumped fake votes into the election. I think it was like 60% of Democrats almost thought that. So if you can say the other side is evil, it can justify, Democrats are evil, they lied about me. So it justifies Trump now doing the exact same thing by denying the election results. It justifies it because Democrats didn't hold their own accountable. So now why should Republicans? And it's the unilateral disarmament argument again. It's the other side. Stacey Abrams still has not admitted she lost Georgia in 2018. She is still saying it was cheated out of her in 2018. Democrats in the 2020 primaries in Atlanta said the exact same lie. There's no proof of that. Hillary Clinton, she did admit that she lost the election like Trump did in January 7th, but then went on for 3 more years to say Trump is an illegitimate president that cheated to win. So, and Trump, again, he admitted that he lost, like, I think 5 times. I have citations for in my last video, but he then turned around after admitting he lost and saying he was focusing on a peaceful transition of power, turned around and said the election was rigged. And he's still saying it to this day. So when one side does this thing and their own party doesn't stand up to buck against them, it gives the other side free license to do the exact same thing. And I know Destiny loves his two-sided Sanders, where Democrats, not nearly as bad when they did it. There's always like a small reason why it's not bad, why they did it. It's okay. We don't even have to mention it. We can look past it. But Donald Trump's an evil, awful human being that should be disqualified for doing it too. So like it's this is how you spot somebody that doesn't care about giving you the truth. They care about getting you on their side for one reason or another. And for Destiny in politics, it's he wants you to vote for his side so that he can get the things that he wants. So he is comfortable either lying about or not even learning the basic stances of the other side so that he can continue to smear them. And if he doesn't know their stances, he's smearing them in a way that's not as bad because he just was lazy. If he does actually know Republicans' real policy stances and he goes on saying that they don't have any, then he is lying, and that's about as low as a human being can be in this sphere of commentary, is intentionally lying about people that just disagree with you in order to get people on your side. So, where was I? Conservatives versus progressives. Yep, okay, we got through that. Why the perception? Yep, we got through that. Okay. So let's look at real-world examples on how this polarization can ruin things with Trump's wall. He was framed as an anti-immigrant racist, and as we saw earlier, Democrats are like 30 points off on what Republicans actually view about immigration. So he was framed as anti-immigrant and racist when his comments on legal immigration were, "We need more than ever with migrating economy, but they have to come in legally." He would say that multiple times. We need more immigrants to come in than ever, but they have to come in legally. Now, to be fair to the other side, he did change immigration policy from a family-based, what he called the lottery, I don't remember what his exact terminology was, but it was a family-based immigration system. He made it more of a merit-based immigration system, which actually did see the numbers of immigrants yearly getting cut down, I think about 45 to 50%. But some tweaks to that exact same policy could see the exact same amount of immigrants coming in just for merit-based reasons. So I don't think Trump's policy was inherently anti-legal immigration. I just think it needed a little bit of work to get to that point. At one point, Trump and his allies in Congress were pushing a bill that would give 2.4 million DACA dreamers a path to citizenship just for border funding. Now, earlier versions of this bill, it was only like 1.6 dreamers. 1.6 million dreamers would be given a path to citizenship, and it would be for the wall funding and for the changes to immigration. Now, I don't remember how because it was years ago, but Trump got the immigration changes from family-based to merit-based done a different way. So that got taken out of the bill. The final version of this bill was 2.4 million DACA dreamers giving a path to citizenship just for, I think it was like $20 billion in border wall funding. That would have been it. That would have been the deal. And Democrats would have gotten exactly what they wanted, but they couldn't do that because they spent 2 years saying Trump was a racist. Trump hates immigrants. Trump's wall is racist. Trump's wall is draconian. He hates immigrants. He's xenophobic. He said a Mexican judge can't watch over his trial because he wants to get illegal immigrants out and blah, blah, which is kind of a gross statement, but that aside, their framing of the guy was he's deeply, deeply awful, and they could not give him this wall, even if this would have been a clear win for them on their goals to give people a path to citizenship. 2.4 million dreamers out of the, I think it's like estimated anywhere between 12 to 20 illegal immigrants in the country. That's over 10% of illegal immigrants that would have gotten a path to citizenship if they just would have taken this deal and given Trump the wall. But they couldn't, because then they would have been conceding and giving him this deeply racist wall. So they shot themselves in the foot, and as a result, the people they claimed to care about and represent didn't get any help. So the deal never came to pass, and we see that all these people remain second-class citizens in the United States, where they can take advantage of some benefits and work, but they don't have the benefits of being a citizen, so they don't get a say in the government they live under, et cetera, et cetera. that was the result. So Democrats had a chance to give a path to citizenship, set up the precedent for it, get it done, and make 2.4 million people U.S. citizens. But they didn't want to do it because they would give Trump his wall. One, and two, this is all speculation. But if they did it under Trump, Trump would get the credit for it, further building his support from the Hispanic community. Now, I'm not going to get into the polling numbers from 2020, but we saw, I think it was like almost half of Hispanics voting for Trump. And now in the Biden era, I want to say the majority of Hispanics are saying they're going to vote Republican in the next coming presidential cycle. All right, so let's look at some more deeply partisan talking heads calling their own sides weak and allowing evil from the other side to have its way. Wait, let's next look at the deeply partisan talking heads calling their own sides weak. And yeah, okay. So this is like people Republicans calling each other rhinos, and progressives saying Democrats are right wing when they're just not as left as they are. You cannot give any ground to the other side at all, or they will get 100% of what you want. Oh, okay, yeah. So it's the lack of compromise. Progressives, they don't get everything they want. Republicans, they don't get everything they want. These are the more extreme elements of the parties. Don't get everything they want, and their people negotiate it all. We're seeing this over the debt ceiling thing. If you give the Democrats anything that they want, or the Republicans anything that they want, you've betrayed the party, you betrayed the movement. You can't help the GOP because the GOP wants to strip minorities of their rights and let poor people starve. Well, you can't help the Democrats because they want to strip us of our civil liberties like the First and Second Amendment, and they want to impose top-down government control on us and groom our kids and blah, blah, blah. All these stupid hyperbole statements. I don't know. As these movements grow, TYT, Steven Crowder, and I want to say more Destiny of old. He's gotten a lot better, but he's still kind of a partisan actor. As these movements grow, it incentivizes more people to do this. You could fuel hate, you could fear monger, you could hate monger, and get a following just by bad faith attacks on the other side. So I see claims like ineffective, evil, stupid, useless, worthless. I just wrote a bunch of things down. I watched some videos of people like Crowder and Destiny and TYT trashing the other side, and these are just examples I wrote down from maybe an hour of skimming through this work. It leads to further to the discussion where the sides don't work together and find other ways to ram through their one-sided policy with no debate from the other side. So we see spikes in executive orders as this partisanship gets worse and worse. Every president that comes in does more than the last guy, and the next guy comes in and undoes most of those executive orders, and we see 2 years of the supermajority ramming through policy without any input from the other side and breaking norms and testing limits, and then we see 2 to 6 years of stagnation where the other side takes back the House and nothing gets done unless they get a say. So what McCarthy and Biden did with the budget is how I think governments should function. And again, how Destiny in 2023 thinks governments should function. But then if you ask him his views on Republicans, he just smears them. He doesn't even know their policies on basic things. So I've heard him. I'm going to do a video on that next. It's like from a couple days ago. He doesn't know basic Republican policy demands. I also personally think any bill that comes to the floor should require 25% of the opposition party voting for it. Now, I'm going to do a video series where I put forward policy proposals and have people debate about them. This is going to be one of them, so I'm not going to go deep into that. I think this wraps up my case on the perception gap, but doesn't go doom and gloom. I look at the pros and the cons. I try to look at it honestly. I try not to blame anybody, hold anyone accountable, and give apologetic reasons why it might not even be their responsibility to dive this deep into something they don't care about that much. But let's move into the next part. So I think I did a good job with my case above. Now I want to tell you what I think is the best way to snap somebody out of this. And I'm a fan of how arguments are broken down, analyzing an argument structure itself and whatnot. So the structure of the argument I'm going to use. It's not found anymore. All right, well, the structure of the argument I'm going to use comes from the New York Times article about Trump's border crisis, and effectively what they were saying is that if you look at Trump's border claims about there's a border crisis and we're being invaded and all these illegal immigrants are coming in, and then you compare the number of illegal immigrants actually trying to come in and coming in versus like 30 years ago when it was way worse, the New York Times is saying, well, we look at 30 years ago, we look at today, we see the problem is significantly less bad. So Donald Trump is actually saying that there's a problem when there isn't one, because we've already solved a much greater problem. So we know how to solve this. It's just a small hiccup and we can come back from it. But if you really carry that argument over broadly to almost any subject in the United States, from racism to poverty to hunger to health, anything, you can make the exact same argument. Almost all modern problems have been conquered in the past when they were much worse. The perception gap itself is one. We had a civil war in the United States. So the perception gap being this bad and polarization being this high is not even close. Unless you're Tim Pool and you think we're already in a civil war and you want to fearmonger your audience and donating to you. I don't even have donations set up. I just want to debate. I just like politics and want to debate people. So we could easily come back from this perception gap. We can easily come back from almost all of our problems, like racial tensions were much worse in the 60s and crime was much higher in the 90s and all sorts of things that, I don't know, that we could fix. We fixed all these things in the past when they were much worse. Almost any major political movement to change something today was done in the past to solve it, much worse. Yep, okay, basically, just paraphrased all the rest of this. So I can see some merit. This is all a little off topic, but I can see some merit behind the arguments made by some of these Soros-funded DAs that you see in cities not prosecuting crimes. I do see some merit behind some of their arguments, and I feel like if I really did a deep dive into what they actually think, some right-wingers would be on board with it too. I've talked to a lot of right-wingers, especially the more slightly right-of-center libertarians. Yes, libertarians are not far right at all. Right-wing means pro-institution to a degree, and if you think that we should get rid of all institutions, you're not far right-wing. So you're really the rhino if you're a libertarian, in my opinion. That being said, I've talked to libertarians that want to remove drug policing from the police's responsibilities and give it to another group that might be better for treating these problems and not just punishing people for them. And that's kind of what these woke DAs are saying to a degree as well on some of these issues. So I really feel like there's a lot of room for these two sides to work together and actually get some good policy. And here's just off the top of my head an example about that. If the right wing was actually working with these policies on bail reform, what bail reform ended up being in a lot of these cities is poor people can't afford bail. So let's just get rid of cash bail. And they call it sensible bail reform. That's not sensible. That's stupid. They just got rid of bail, and now if you don't qualify to be held in prison until trial, you just get let go. So we see offenders of some violent crimes getting let out. I think one man had 54 crimes against him within 2 years. Didn't see a day of jail time from it. I'm not sure if all of them were violent. I don't remember. I'm just rattling off things here, so don't take this part too literally. But if the right wing was involved in that process of reforming bail to actually make it sensible, what they could have said is, instead of just getting rid of cash bail, how about we put in a factor that bases your cash bail off of the crime you committed versus your yearly income from the last 5 years. If you're in poverty, you shouldn't have to pay the same bail as somebody who's a millionaire for the exact same crime. It should be based off of income. So if you made $1 million and the fine was $10,000 for a poor person, it's $100,000 for you. Just throwing numbers out there without a scale or anything. This is just a policy idea that could have made actual sensible bail reform that didn't discriminate against somebody because of how much money they had in their bank account. But they don't want to work with right-wingers. They think right-wingers are evil, so they don't even want their input. And something this simple I just thought of when I was writing the script could have solved the bail reform problem, or at least made it a lot better that we're seeing right now. But instead, they're just doubling down. And we see crime rising. We see a lot of repeat offenders getting out without jail time or without just a slap on the wrist. So I do actually see sometimes on social workers instead of police is a good thing, blah, blah, blah. That being said, there's a gentleman named Donut Operator who makes police shooting video breakdowns and whatnot, and he used to be a police officer. He talks about how domestic disputes are the most common to turn into violence against a police officer. I don't know if that's true. He says it. If it's not true, at him, not me. But if that's true, like, you don't want a social worker going in there for a domestic dispute, or at least by themselves. You also want an officer that can protect and make sure that that worker gets to go home that night. That's why officers have guns for the most part, is so they can also have worker protections. A gun on a police officer is a worker protection. Now, so that was my framing of my general argument. Now for my actual weaponized whataboutism tactics. This is going to actually take you through the tactics of what you should do when you're having a conversation with these people that are one-sided, that have the perception gap issue facing them. So the first step is you have to admit the person is correct. Yes, action X that you're talking about is bad. Yes, it's bad that Donald Trump took classified documents from the White House and then lied to the FBI and hid them from the FBI. Yes, that is bad. He should be persecuted to the full extent of the law, point blank, period, full stop. End of statement. That being said, somebody like Destiny is not the good person to make that assessment because he won't even look into the Mueller report or the Durham report that damns his own side in almost the exact same ways. These people were lying to the FBI, Democratic officials that worked for the DNC, people that were paid by the DNC, like lawyers and whatnot, were actively making up stories that were not factually true about Trump and pushing to their sources in the FBI, who were skipping methods, skipping sources, and opening in full investigations that should not have been opened against Donald Trump to hurt his electoral chances. That was their goal. It's stated in the Durham report. Now, people won't even look into that from the other side. Destiny, I didn't even look at it, he says, as he's scrolling through the Trump charges, reading them out on a stream for an hour. He won't even look at the Durham report. It's wild to me that you won't even look at the other side being corrupt because you're so indoctrinated into your one-sided politics. You want your policy positions advanced so much that you're willing to use dishonest tactics like this. Now, I don't know enough about Dunning-Kruger to actually elaborate on this, but the Dunning-Kruger effect, to my understanding, at least part of it, is being really good at one thing and assuming you could be good at other things that you don't have the expertise in just because you've mastered one thing. I think that's part of it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't fucking know. That being said, that's what I see a lot, is somebody like Destiny who's a good debater. He actually has really good debates about certain topics and knows his shit. When he starts getting into politics, he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, and he can only beat these low-hanging fruit. Sure, he embarrassed Cenk Uygur on his channel. Well, embarrassed. He beat him in a debate on his channel, but Cenk's an idiot. Like, you get an actual politician on there, it's going to run circles around this dude. Destiny doesn't even know basic Democrat stances, so... also, where was I? So, I don't know. So yeah, there's admitting you were wrong, but then also, so I think the example I was using here was Trump's first impeachment, actually. So Trump's first impeachment over the Ukraine phone call is an example of this happening in the last few years. I watched that impeachment from start to finish. There was actually a little bit of pressure put on Ukraine from Trump. Now, if you're saying that requests from the government, even if they don't have that unspoken pressure actually verbalized, are that, like, if a government makes a request of another government that we give money to, there's an unspoken pressure there. That was the case against Trump. He didn't actually say quid pro quo, but just asking for them to do this investigation was the quid pro quo, because if the president who's giving you billions of dollars asks for something and then withholds that money for a couple of days, or threatens to anyways, then that was their insinuation that he was doing it so he could subvert the election. Now, if you believe that, if you believe Trump was guilty and actually did that thing, then you can't turn around like Destiny does and say that the government asking Twitter to take down posts and ban people didn't have that exact same pressure behind it. So either that pressure exists when Trump does it, and it also exists when Biden does it, like when he asks Ukraine to fire somebody that's investigating Burisma, and then that person gets fired that day, and then Joe Biden releases the funding to Ukraine. That's the exact same pressure. The Biden administration going to Twitter and asking them to remove posts and monitor or remove users, or the FBI doing it, it's the exact same pressure that Trump would have hypothetically put on Ukraine by making a request of them. So if you get outraged by one of these things and say Trump is guilty, or if you get outraged and say the Twitter files are damning, and you don't go with the other argument, then maybe it's you that's fallen under the spell of the perception gap. And maybe you are the one that needs to kind of balance out your media diet a little bit more. So people would point out that Biden did the exact same thing, and then Bill Clinton, and the calls made to the UK. I think Bill Clinton called Tony Blair here. I got a citation in here for it. I didn't look that much. Bill Clinton called Tony Blair before an election, asked him to do some political stuff that would help him in the political season a little bit, and that's essentially what Trump is accused of, and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that there was as much pressure from the government on Tony Blair as there would be on Vladimir Zelensky, because we don't really, like, the UK can get by without the US, so I don't think that same pressure exists. But if we're saying just government requests, this is more for the Twitter files people. If you're saying just a government request to Twitter would come with an unspoken implication of a threat, then so would this, wouldn't it? So would all the rest of the things that you're looking past. So I don't know. I'm just trying to be fair. I'm just trying to use the same standard for both sides. I would probably sooner vote for a Democrat, a cliche blue dog Democrat, than I would for almost any form of Republican. But I'm not going to say I didn't vote for Trump in 2020, because I did. So, I could go either way. It is important here that you point at a logical line and be ready for the silly counter. So I'm going to talk about a silly counter argument back that I'm probably going to get from people if they see this as well. Are you really comparing X with Y? Yes, I am. Yes, I am actually comparing what Biden did with Ukraine and what Clinton did with Tony Blair to what Trump did with Ukraine and what the Biden administration and team did with the Twitter files. I feel like there's a very clear through line that I laid out. The government putting pressure on people and making requests with an unspoken underlying threat of action if you don't say yes. So, yes, I'm actually comparing these things, and the definition of a comparison takes two separate things that are not the same and draws a comparison line is exactly what I just did. So I'm not saying these two things are the same. Anyone who comes to you and says, are you really comparing X with Y? They aren't the same thing. You say, yes, I know. I need two different things to make a comparison, because if they're exactly the same, there's no comparison to make because they are 100% the same. So that being said, some comparisons can be bad. If somebody brings up a factor that really shows why, like mass shootings, you see more mass shootings in schools than in gun ranges, and somebody says, well, maybe there's something wrong with schools, maybe they're asking for more shooting, and someone else says, no, you can't make that comparison because one's a gun-free zone and one's a you need to bring your gun zone. So the reason we see less shootings at gun ranges is because everyone's armed, and we see in manifestos and whatnot that mass shooters pick schools and pick places that are gun-free zones specifically because there'll be nobody with a gun there to stop them. So that's an example of a bad comparison and a factor that actually limits that comparison. So you just got to pick your examples wisely and be open to the fact that you might be wrong too. So whataboutism itself can also often and mostly of the time I see it is used as a cope tactic. But the tactic itself, just like almost any logical fallacy, say like a slippery slope or a true Scotsman argument or cherry picking, all these things can also be used in a way that's not a logical fallacy, that actually does have some merit to it. You just have to use them properly. You can't just throw these things out there willy-nilly without thinking about your argument before you say it. I can think of examples of a slippery slope or a no true Scotsman argument that actually hold up, that aren't just logical fallacies that can be dismissed. So, to avoid this cope tactic, the first step is okay. Yes. So yes, again, I was just talking about my recapping my tactics for the argument. Yes, your point is correct. Yes, I agree. Yes, that is bad. Yes, it's bad that X person did what they did. Yet this is actually more common government practice than you might think. And here's some examples of Y, Z, A, B, C, and D all doing something very similar in the past, and you could see the escalation, and maybe you could understand the logic of why X president thought his actions were justified. And this is also why police aren't coming after him for his actions, because there is precedent. Pushing just pros and cons. Okay, so yeah, remember every stance you have or politicians you like has cons. Every single political stance has negatives. So if somebody is just coming up and telling you the positives of their side and never addressing the negatives and denying the negatives exist and saying, my political choice is all wins, across the board, there's going to be no downside to it. Don't trust that person. Don't ever trust that person. Somebody that can't be honest about the cons of their own side is a used car salesman. They're not somebody you should trust. They're somebody you should fact check at every chance you get. And that's what turned me from a avid Bernie Sanders supporter to somebody that thinks that Bernie Sanders is one of the biggest purveyors of misinformation and stochastic terrorism of any politician of our lifetime. A lot of things he says I could go through and just debunk in real time with like polling data or policy, but it's not the video point. So I just wanted to keep bringing that up. I was a big Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016, and now I'm politically homeless because I realize he's just as bad as everybody else. Even the most left-wing people have conservative viewpoints. So yeah, this is summing it all up. This is why the perception gap is bad. Everybody on the conservative side has some viewpoints that don't line up with the conservative movement. This is not a blob of groupthink. There's a lot of wiggle room for someone from the left wing to come in and sway these people. Look at single-payer healthcare. Now, single-payer healthcare, and this is kind of Bernie Sanders' misinformation here, is a nebulous term. When you actually break down the polling data, you find that the majority of the people that support single-payer healthcare, things like 45% of Republicans, 60% of Democrats, and like 50% of moderates, the majority of those people don't support Bernie Sanders' plan. They don't want to abolish private healthcare and enhance Medicare. Medicare is bad. Medicare is something that 1/3 of doctors are not taking new Medicare patients because the system sucks. They don't make any money off of it. They're losing money off of it, and they don't like it. So Medicare is not something doctors like. Bernie Sanders' plan to expand Medicare and make it illegal for private companies to compete against the government is not the plan most people want. Polling shows most people want that Hillary Clinton type of plan, which is a single-payer option, similar to, I think, what Australia and China do, that allows maybe the poor people, disabled people, whatnot, to get single-payer health care and pool their costs and whatnot, but allow the massive, thriving private market to exist. I think Canada, Australia, Japan, all these countries that are up there with the U.S. in terms of results, healthcare results, like the U.S. is the best place to go for cancer or for heart issues or whatnot, and Australia, Canada, Japan, and a couple other countries are up there with us in terms of like medical results for across the board. Yet they pay significantly less for their healthcare because they have a system like this where they let their poor people and whatnot have single payer in a sense, or a version of it. So I think that there's a lot that can be learned from these people, and making a government program just for the bottom 20%, mostly young people, because poverty is greatly linked to age. I don't think it would cost the government as much as people think, and if you put a limit on it. And now I know putting limits on social spending plans is also part of the, it's called the welfare trap. As soon as you actually do something to better your life, you lose your welfare program, you end up poorer than you were before you did something to better your life, and yeah, whatever, that's a whole different subject. So yeah, most left-wing conservatives or left-wingers have some conservative viewpoints, most right-wingers have some liberal viewpoints, and there's a lot of wiggle room to work with the other side. But if you view everybody as just a demonized, worse version of their party, the monolith, the evil bad guy, the evil whatever, commie or fascist, then you're not going to care to even talk to these people that actually probably agree with you in a lot. And even somebody as uneducated and hyper-partisan and just toxic as Jimmy Dore even understands this. He reaches out to right-wingers and says, we disagree on a lot of things, especially abortion, but we're allies on this subject. Let's work together on this subject to get this done. And that, to me, is the right way to politic. Politics makes clever bedfellows. And if you're saying, well, this is a right-wing stance, well, Hitler owned a dog. Hitler breathed oxygen. Hitler loved his wife. You know, like, right-wing stances aren't inherently evil because the people you don't like believe them or whatever. A lot of the things the fascists did weren't necessarily evil. It's just their smaller government policies. They actually helped the people. That's how they had popular support and won elections. Got power was by doing things that were actually good for the people. So a lot of it was also fear-mongering, too. We see that from everybody. And just a couple of examples. Conserving the environment, climate change activism. This is a deeply conservative movement. There's nothing progressive about wanting to keep the environment the way it is and not change it and work actively to preserve it. That's deeply conservative, yet it's only on the left wing in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of right-wingers who don't like pollution and whatnot, but the climate change movement, specifically climate fear, climate doomsdayism, that's exclusively left-wing, but the argument at its core is conservative. And same thing with right-wingers. Right-wingers, back 150 years ago when life expectancy was lower, used to get married at 14, and now it seems like the majority of right-wingers are taking this stance against grooming children and the innocence of children, preserving their innocence. So I bet you right-wingers would want to lobby to get rid of consent laws and protect minors much more than we did, or enhance consent laws and protect minors more than we did 150 years ago, right? So that would be, in my mind, a progressive stance from the right wing. We want to progress these laws to further protect the rights of children. But 150 years ago, this couldn't happen because at that time, 14 was kind of considered an adult in many ways. So I feel like there's a bunch of room on both sides, and it's just being squandered because of hateful tribalism, smearing, and really just not bothering to just hear your opposition out and what they're really saying. So really, let's all just do a little bit better and make this go away because it kind of sucks.